you were here last year. Probably most of you were here last year. And so I do want to assure you, I've got a lot of the same stuff, but I've got a lot of new stuff involved too. And if anybody here can remember everything I said last year anyway, there's the door, okay? So if you're that good, then you don't need to see this show. All right, well, my name is Kurt, sorry Bobby, it's Burnett, Kurt Burnett, from Limberlost State Historic Site. I'm a naturalist, educator, tour guide there, and I've been here about 12 years now, so I've learned a lot about Gene Stratton Porter and Limberlost. I also have a farm background myself. I grew up in central Illinois on a hog farm / grain elevator that my uncle owned and my dad ran. And I've been inside many a grain bin. I've helped build grain bins. I've been putting up elevator legs. I've put up tower grain dryers. So even though I'm not a farmer like many of y'all are, I got a good, strong farm background in. So really appreciate all you guys. Now, we're going to go ahead and get rolling here. All right, it's working great. All right, well, at Limberlost State Historic Site, what we do is preserve Gene Stratton Porter's legacy, both the house she lived in, the Limberlost cabin, and of course the swamp and the other wetlands that she made famous. So that's our purpose there. And we're located in Geneva, which is known as the land of the Limberlost. We're also one of the bird towns in Indiana. We were actually the first bird town designated in Indiana because Gene Stratton Porter lived there. She was the bird woman, so we got that honor of being the first bird town. There's a lot of towns in Indiana now that are in fact bird towns. And for those of you who may not know where we're at, there we are on the map, right over there near the Ohio border, south of Fort Wayne. And that's what our building looked like when it was brand new. It's a little faded now. It's been there 11 years. So don't expect if you come visit with us to look exactly like that, but it's a nice visitor center. We've got a gift shop, restrooms, displays, so we really are proud of that. And of course, the famous Limberlost cabin. That's what we give tours of. Now here's just a glimpse of the inside. I'm not going to show you any more than that because we want you to come and visit with it. That's what's called a teaser, right? We're teasing you with it. It's a one-of-a-kind house. I guarantee if you came and took a look, you would be impressed. So, 100 years ago, Gene Stratton Porter, Wabash native, she was one of Indiana's most famous citizens. And you can see she was a multi-talented person, author, naturalist, nature photographer, movie producer. Now, here's something I've added. I want you all to understand what Gene Stratton Porter did for Indiana and Wabash County. This is a magazine called The New Zealand Farmer, published, of course, in New Zealand. Look at the date, August 2nd, 1920. And I've got another page from that same magazine up there. It's called Children's Post Office. The children of the farmers could write in, and to a character apparently called Uncle Ned, and you could be a cousin, and write in and just say whatever you wanted to Uncle Ned. And so, on this issue, 1920, I've highlighted here what one young person said. Dear Uncle Ned, thank you for allowing me to become a cousin. I consider it a great honor to be one. I like reading very much, and Gene Stratton Porter is my favorite author. Have you read Freckles, The Girl from Limberlost, Laddie? So there it shows you, in 1920, people around the world, children around the world, farm kids, were reading Gene Stratton Porter, and not only were they reading her, she was one of their favorite authors. That's not an unusual thing. I've been digging back into magazines from the past like that online, and I've seen that in Canada, England, New Zealand. So Gene Stratton Porter brought Indiana to the entire world. And I don't think we realize that enough. It was a long time ago, sure, but she really made Indiana world famous. And if you were to ask somebody in New Zealand to name American states, they would name Indiana. They knew Indiana because of Gene Stratton Porter. So let's just talk a bit about her life. Her full name was Geneva Grace Stratton Porter. She was born August 17th in 1863 here in Wabash County. and she died December 6, 1924. She was only 61 years old. Now, you young people out there are going, wow, that's old, 61. But those of us over 61 realize we know it's not all that old. So she died at a relatively young age. Here's a picture of her when she was living on the farm just north of LeGros, the Hopewell Farm. She's 11 years old in that picture. Here's teenage Jean Stratford living here in Wabash, going to high school. There's the young married Jean Stratford living up in Decatur. There she is, living in Geneva when she was published her first book, at the age of 40. There she is in her 50s, living over by Rome City at her other Limberlost cabin she built. And finally, that's her out in California where she ended up living out her life. And here's those places I just mentioned to y'all, and the amount of time she lived there. Well, here, north of LeGros in Wabash, she lived about 11 years. 12 years here in the city of Wabash. She lived 2 years in Decatur after she married, then moved down to Geneva, which, same name, it's just pure coincidence that Geneva moved to Geneva. She lived there longer than any other place in her life, about 25 years. Then she moved up to Rome City for a few years, about 6 years, then out to California, about 5 years. But we're going to focus the most on her time here in Wabash County, which I did last year, but I got a little more emphasis and some new pictures and information. Well, there you go. That's Wabash County in 1861, and the red square rectangle you see there, that's where Mark Stratton's Hopewell Farm was located, north of LeGros. Well, at that time, the city of Wabash, from the time period that Jean was here, you can see the numbers, 1870, 2,881. By 1880, they'd grown, about 1,000 people, really growing back in those days. LeGros was a smaller town then, as is now, and it was also several hundred people. All right, we're going to zoom in now on that old 1861 map, and at the bottom, you can see on the right-hand side, the Wabash River, on the left-hand side at the bottom, there's LeGros, and the red rectangle up there is Mark Stratton's 240-acre Hopewell Farm, where Jean Stratford was born and spent those 11 years. There we got a little closer. You can see the name there. And I want y'all to notice this name up above there, Pratt. Remember that name, Pratt. We're going to come back to it in a few minutes. There's the house that Jean Stratford was born in and grew up in. No longer there, burned down a long time, about 100 years ago or more. And on Mark Stratton's farm, he built a church, a Hopewell Church, and a school. And there's a picture of those two near each other. The school's no longer there, but many of y'all probably know the Hopewell Church is still out there. Now, here's some drawings done by a woman named Mary Ethel Brumfield, as described to her by Ada Wilson, who was one of Jean's sisters. So here it's kind of an overview of some of the land that they own, and we'll zoom in and get a little closer, and you'll see the typical things. They had there's the church and the cemetery down there on the right-hand side, and all the fields, the farm fields, and things that they had. Typical things from that time period. Zooming in a little closer, you start seeing things like the orchard, the garden, the woodlots. We'll zoom in a little more, and you start seeing where the pigs were, the hogs, the chickens, and the big garden that they had. And even closer, now you can see the pigs and the chickens and the raspberry patch. Blackberry and raspberry, that's a great thing to have. I love those. There's a drawing of the house the Porters lived in. You saw the photograph of it. And that's the interior, downstairs on the left, and the upstairs on the right. And if you read the book Laddie, and you have that in front of you, you would see that the house described in there is exactly as you see it there. So we're going to talk more about Laddie in a minute, but that Laddie is a description of the house and the grounds there. It's almost an autobiography. It's fiction, but it's very close to being an autobiography. Now, Mark and Mary Stratton had 12 kids. And they spread them out. Take a look at that. Catherine, firstborn, 1836, 27 years older than Jean, who was the last child born. 27 years older. When Jean was born, the older children were scandalized. You know, they're having kids, and now their parents are having kids still. So they weren't too happy about Jean's arrival because, you know, those parents were older by then. They shouldn't be doing that sort of thing. So, well, you know how it is. Notice, though, that Catherine was born in 1836 and Geneva 1863. That's an easy way to remember it. Their kids were born from the years 36 to 63 in 1800s. All right, next was Anastasia. She was born 2 years later, and she's 25 and a half years older than Jean. Then 2 years later, there's a pattern here, folks, 2 years later. Then Mary Ann was born 1840, 23 and a half years older than Jean. And Louisa was born in 1842. Unfortunately, she died in 1851. Then Jerome, first boy, born 1844. Another 2 years later, he was 19 years old. Then Samara, another 2 years later, born in 1846, but she died in 1852. And then Urban was born in 1848. Every 2 years, like clockwork. So at least to that point. And Urban was 15 and a half years older than Jean. Then we have Florence, who broke the pattern. She was born in 1851, 12 and a half years older. Leander, who is known as Laddie, born in 1853. He was 10 years older. Lemon was born in 1856, 7 and a half years older. And finally, before Geneva was born, Ada was born in 1858. She was 5 and a half years older. So, they thought Ada was the end. And then 5 and a half years later, surprise, here comes Geneva. And that was kind of a scandal in the family because Geneva had nieces and nephews older than she was. Now, while the Strattons were living at the Hopewell Farm, they lost, unfortunately, 4 of their children. Louisa Jane, I mentioned, she died in 1851. She was 9 years old. It was the whooping cough. Samara died November 4th, 1852, at the age of 6 of scarlet fever. Mary Ann died in 1872, but she was older. She was 32. She died as a result of lingering railway injuries. We're not exactly sure what that railroad accident was, where it was, but we do know she died a few years later because of that. So anybody here knows anything about that, or has a book that can tell me anything, I'd love knowing more about it. And finally, Leander Laddie died in the same year, a few months after Mary Ann died, at the age of, in 1872, at the age of 19, he drowned in the Wabash River. Very tragic thing. Jean loved her brother dearly. And those 2 deaths helped kind of do in the mother. She lost 4 children, and 2 of them within a few months. And her health was not good anyway. So unfortunately, we'll talk about that. Her mother died just a few years later, a few months after they moved here to Wabash. There's the Hopewell Cemetery, so you all are familiar with that. There's the Hopewell Church. And there's a Stratton plot within that cemetery where some of the headstones there, you know, Mark, Mary, and Laddie are there, plus some of the other relatives. But not Jean Stratton Porter. She's buried up at the Home City Historic Site. That's where she's at up there. All right, let's talk about the book Laddie. One of y'all would be lucky and pick that book. It's one of my favorites because it's farm life. And like I said, you know, y'all, a lot of you farmers here grew up on a farm. I grew up on a farm. So I really enjoy reading Laddie, especially it gives you a feel for the 1800s of what it was like. And on the left-hand side, the blue one there, which I think is that kind of what y'all got back there, Penny? I think I saw the blue, a first edition of Laddie. And then over the years, it's been reprinted many times. There's an example of a cover, a dust jacket from one version. And here's another slightly more modern version that shows Laddie, a character called the Princess. And then in the background is a character called Little Sister. Little Sister is Jean Stratton Porter, because Little Sister in the book is the 12th child of the Hoosier farm family. So, like I said, very autobiographical. And this is the inside cover, if you opened up that book back there on the table, it's going to look just like this, first edition. I believe that's first edition. They're not as one of the early editions. And it's got a nice picture there. Once again, Laddie, the princess, little sister in the background. And you notice the subtitle of Laddie, A True Blue Story. What does that tell you? True blue. It's very real to life. It in fact is very much the way it was for Jean as she grew up. And this was published in 1913. Now, the dedication in that book says to Leander Elliott Stratton, and there's a quote, "The way to be happy is to be good," which is something he would tell his little sister all the time. Little sister, that's the way to be happy. And here's an illustration from a first edition. It shows the princess on her horse and talking to little sister. And by the way, in the book, you never know little sister's name. It's always little sister. Never hear it. It's like in Freckles and the Girl of the Limberlost. There's a character called the Bird Woman. It's Jean Stratton Porter. Her real nickname was the Bird Woman, but you never hear the name other than Bird Woman. She always kept her family names like that. She always never used the real names. And this book was big, folks. This shows you an advertisement by her publishing company, admittedly, so they're going to promote it, but it got a lot of great reviews. Overall, the reviews were very good. And you see, in 5 months' time, back in 1913, 302,000 copies were sold. So this was huge. It was a huge success. And in fact, 1913, that's the bestseller list. Number 3, Latin. Jean had other books, by the way, in the top 10 bestseller list. And in 1912, that's the year the Titanic sank. That's what you think about 1912, the Titanic sinking. But the number 1 best-selling fiction book in the United States was The Harvester by Jean Stratton Porter. And here's what Jean said herself about her book, Laddie. "I could write no truer biography. To the contour of hill and field, to the last stripe on the wallpaper and knock on the door, that is the home in which I was born." So she's describing Wabash County to the T in that book. The book was also somewhat of a wish fulfillment for her beloved brother, Laddie, since in the book he does not drown. So it's true to a point, but she's not going to have her book end with her brother drowning. Instead, she has it end with what everyone wished had happened, and actually what was going to happen, where he wed his fiancée. He drowned before he got married. Now, in the book, like I said, it's real life, so if you compare on the left the characters in the book to the right, the real people, you can go down the list and you'll find it's exactly the way her family was. In the book, Laddie was her brother Leander, who was really known as Laddie. Little sister, as I said, was Jean. Pamela Pryor, who was known as the Princess. In real life, she was Cornelia Pratt. See the name Pratt? Told y'all remember Pratt. Their neighbor to the north was Pratt in real life. And so in real life, Laddie got engaged to the daughter of his neighbor to the north, Joseph Pratt. And unfortunately, as I said, they never married. Then in the book, you've got Paul and Ruth Stanton, which are Mary and Mark Stratton. Leon in the book was in real life Lemon. There's an easy one. Just take the M out of the middle and you got your new character's name. And then Jean used a lot of her family's nicknames or middle names. You see Sally, her sister Mary Ann, who was known as Molly. Shelley was her sister Florence Schellenberger. May was her sister Ada May. Elizabeth, the oldest sister, was Catherine Elizabeth. Jerry was Jerome. Frank was Irvin Franklin. Lucy was Anastasia Lucella. And in real life, LaGrove was the town in the book, Groveville. So, very similar. Now, based on a statement that was made in Laddie in the book, that Leon was about 16 or so, due to the age differences between Jean and her siblings, little sister would have been in the book about 8 or 9 years old. And if you read the behavior of little sister, how she acts as a child, that fits pretty well. You figure she's around that age. All right, here's some pictures of her actual family. There's Mark, her father. There's her mother, Mary. That's the best picture that we have at this time of Brother Laddie. That's from a newspaper article. That's why it looks so rough. Because we wish anybody here, if y'all ever can come up with a photograph of Laddie, you're my hero. Because we really want to know what that guy looked like, and that's the only one we have so far. And there's her sister Ada, there's her sister Florence, her brother Lemon, her brother Irvin, her oldest sister Catherine. And Catherine, by the way, married and moved up to North Manchester. That's where she was living for a while. She went out to California. Eventually, as did her brother Jerome. That's the only picture I have of Jerome. No picture of her as a youth. But there's Jerome and Jean out in California. Now, here's a book some of y'all may be familiar with, the Pioneer Days in Wabash Valley. And I'm not going to read this whole paragraph there, but it talks about the real princess in the book. She's known as Pamela Pryor, but in real life it was Camellia Pratt, as I said. And it is just like in the book, the princess is fond of horses. Well, Camellia in real life was fond of horses and a good rider. She did eventually marry a young man named Croom. Anybody here got a relative in the past named Croom? Down around the Grove. Both Camellia and her husband Croom are buried, you can see, at the IOOF cemetery at the Grove. And she died in 1917. So after Laddie drowned, then Camellia did marry someone else. Okay. I might actually turn it off. That's me, duh. Okay, so another thing that's very important about y'all may not know the Underground Railroad was here in Wabash County like it was in a lot of places in Indiana. And the Hopewell Farm, Stratton's actual farm, served as an Underground Railroad station, and it's mentioned in Laddie. There's some quotes I put up there from the book where Leon and little sister are discussing their suspicions about what's going on because their parents didn't tell them about it. But you'll see in the middle paragraph that Leon says, once I was awake in the night and heard voices. It made me want to drink, so I went downstairs for it and ran right into the biggest, blackest man who ever grew. If father and mother hadn't been there, I'd been scared into fits. Next morning he was gone, and there was no whisper. Father said I'd had bad dreams, so he didn't want his children knowing that they were harboring runaway slaves there. Now, let's talk about the movies that were made of Laddie. 3 times Laddie was made into a movie. This is the one that Gene Stratton's production company that she started out in California. She actually started a movie company, and this one was done after her death, a version of Laddie. And look at the list of actors there. Down below John Bowers, you see Gene Stratton. Now wait a minute, I just told you Gene Stratton Porter was dead, but one of Gene's granddaughters was named Jean Stratton Monroe. And her granddaughter acted in 3 movies based on her mother's life, her grandmother's life after her death. So she was an actress, and she portrayed, guess what? Little sister in the book, in the movie. Then that's an actual movie review from 1926, 25. 26. It got an 80% score. You see there, romantic drama they called it. There's little sister. There's Gene's granddaughter there in the picture. And so it did pretty well. It made money. All the movies made of Gene's books by Gene's production company made money. They were successful. And some of them were actually, the movie Keeper of the Beach was considered the best money maker that came out in 1925. It made the most money for theater owners of all movies released that year. Then in 1935, another version was done. And there again, you see the princess, Laddie, and little sister. And look at the second name down on that list of actors, Gloria Stewart. Anybody here know that actress's name? You've all seen her. She was in movies back then, but there was a movie fairly recent, 25 years ago, that was huge. Who here saw Titanic? Most everybody saw Titanic. Yeah. Well, Old Rose, the old lady, Gloria Stewart. So that's where those of us from our era would remember Gloria Stewart from, not from a movie in 1935. And finally, 1940 was the last time a movie version of Laddie was made. Once again, you'll see Little Sister, Princess, and Laddie. And the actors here, the guy that plays Laddie, he was a big movie star, lots of westerns. If you like old westerns, you probably saw this character, this actor, Tim Holt. He would have made a huge career of westerns. So if you've seen a black and white western from the 30s into the 60s, you probably saw Tim Holt. And if you're an old movie buff like me, and you like the classics, if you've ever seen The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, which is a great movie, Humphrey Bogart, one of the three main characters is that actor there, Tim Holt. And if you like really mad monster movies like me, then there's a movie called, from the 50s, A Monster That Challenged the World. And Tim Holt's the hero in that movie. I like that guy. He's got versatility. Now, we're going to focus again on Wabash a little bit. There's your town here in 1861. And we'll just run through this. I ran through this last year, but it's really interesting stuff just to see what it was like for Jean Stratford to live here. You'll see that in October 1874, they left the farm due to her mother's illness. And Mark, Mary, Lynn, and Florence, Ada, and Jean moved in with Anastasia, her husband Alva, and their two children. You know how many people that was in that house? 11. 11 people in that house. Yeah. And that house is still here, by the way. It's still here in Wabash. I've forgotten the address. I'm getting old. I forgot the address, but I looked it up, and it still exists here in Wabash. So a few months later, unfortunately, Jean's mother died, typhoid fever at the age of 59. So then Mark, Florence, Ada, and Jean moved down the street to a rented house. Then in October 1882, some years later, her sister Florence married and moved out. And then the next year, unfortunately, Jean's sister Anastasia died of cancer at the age of 45. And then Ada, her sister, married a gentleman, Franklin Wilson. So then Mark, Ada, Franklin, Jean moved back with Alva, and Lemon was still living there. So there's another big household. Then Lemon, next month, married, moved away. And then in December, 2 months after Lemon left, Jean slipped on the ice in downtown Wabash, fell down, cracked her skull. And you can see that her family despaired for her life. It was that serious. And after 3 months, she was able to finally start walking with the use of a cane. So she was very, very seriously injured, unfortunately, in downtown Wabash. But the next year, then Anastasia's widowed husband remarried, and so then Mark, Ada, and Franklin and Jean moved back down the street. And it was the summer of 1884 that Jean, still using a cane, she attended a Chautauqua in Rome City, and a gentleman named Charles D. Porter favorably notices her and did a very daring thing. He wrote her a letter. He never met her. He wrote her a letter. That was not good in those days. You weren't supposed to do that. You didn't write a woman unless you met her first and introduced properly to her. He had not been. He dared to do that letter. She dared to write back. And they fell in love. So there you go. Sometimes it pays off to be daring. In love, at least. So they met the next summer after writing many letters at the Chautauqua in Rome City. They were engaged. Just a few months later, the following spring, they wed at her sister Ada's home right here in Wabash on 112 Hill Street. Anybody live near there or know where that's at? Yeah. I'm not super familiar with Wabash. So the newlyweds moved into Charles's boyhood home in Decatur in Adams County. So Jean's 22 years and 8 months of living in Wabash County came to an end. So y'all came close to having the record amount of time for Jean in your county, but guess what? Adams County does have you beat because she lived around Geneva for 25 years. She lived up in Decatur for 2 years. So we had her about 26 or 7 years in that range. But she was born here. She grew up here. She wrote a book about here. So you all have this beat, they lived in Decatur about 2 years, then they purchased a little yellow house in Geneva, and they lived there 7 or 8 years. Then they got rich from oil. Charles had a farm, and on that farm, besides cattle and crops and things like that, oil was discovered. He purchased more land. Oil's discovered, boom, he's buying land. He's a smart guy. And they put down eventually 60 oil wells. And so they had the money to build this fabulous place known as the Limberlaw's Cabin. That's a picture she took of it herself. And then after living there for 18 years, longer than any other house in her life, Jean purchased, with her book-selling money, 120 acres up on the shore of Sylvan Lake outside Rome City, built another log home called Limberlaw's Cabin North. She moved in there February 1914. Nice to have some money. So there are actually two Jean Stratford homes are state historic sites. And Jean Stratford State Historic Sites closed in the winter. They're going to reopen in April. But we're open year-round down there in Geneva. So I highly recommend, number one, visit us at Limberlaw's. Number two, go to Jean Stratford. Notice the order I put those in. Us first, Jean Stratford second. They're both really worth seeing. Then Jean decided to live in California. She built a summer home on Catalina Island. They're a little summer home. That's just the place she spends some summertime in. Then she built that place as her main residence, California. Look at that. I mean, that's a mansion. That's a Bel Air mansion. She was one of the richest women in the United States because she was selling millions of books around the world. Millions. And that's what you do when you've got millions of dollars. Unfortunately, she never lived in it. She died before she moved in, just a few weeks before she moved in. She died. Was killed, actually. We'll talk about more in a second. All right, let's just mention her family. She only had one child, a daughter named Jeanette, who she nicknamed Molly Cotton, and there's Jeanette in Limberlaw's Cabin in Geneva. They had a pet parrot. His name was the Major. And then that's her husband, known around the town as the Deacon, because he kind of looked, I guess, deaconish. I don't know, but that's what they called him. I'm just guessing. Anyway, he was not actually a deacon in the church. He was just called the Deacon. And anytime Jean refers to her husband, her daughter, in her books of nature books that she wrote, it's always the Deacon and Molly Cotton. Once again, never says Jeanette, never says Charles. It's always those nicknames. I told you Charles had a farm. You see it at the bottom there of the list. But he also had a drugstore. He had a bank. He had a hotel. He was into all kinds of things. If he thought he could make some money at it, he probably gave it a go. Now, let's just talk about Jean's career real quick. She had 182 separate magazine publications. You could hardly pick up a magazine in the early 20s and not find something about Jean Stratford. It was amazing. It did include some of her book serializations. She wrote 12 novels, 8 nature books, 3 major poetic works, and 2 books for children. At that time, she was estimated to have 50 million readers. Now, this country only had about 100 million people in it. So, anywhere in this country, if you said Jean Stratford, they knew who you're talking about. I don't know if it'd be quite the same as saying Taylor Swift now, but she had huge fame. And there's a list of the books that she wrote. We listed them there in the part we gave away with some of the book covers that are available. And there we go, best-selling author. I mentioned that Harvester was number 1 in 1912. It was number 5 in 1911. And then Laddie, as I said, made number 3 in 1913. Michael Halloran also made number 3 in 1915. And then you got Daughter of the Land, was the number 9 bestseller. Father's Daughter, number 8. And her last one, Keeper of the Bees, made number 3 in 1925. You don't see Freckles and Grover Limberlost there on that top 10 list because those were written before she kind of caught on as much. And so people went back afterwards and started catching up on reading those 2 books. So when you look down below, you'll see that they were the top 2 bestsellers over time. And in a survey done in 1935, Well, the best-selling books from 1885 to 1935, of the top 24 were written by Gene Stratton Porter. You see Freckles, Gurgle and the Lost Harvester, Laddie. Once again, there's Wabash County. And at the bottom it says no other author in the top 20 had even 2 books on the list. So those top 20, 4 were hers, and the other 16 were 16 different authors. And we're talking about Mark Twain, Jack London, some of the biggies of the time. She was enormously popular. Nature was her theme on most of her books. There's another book, I want to mention this. I didn't bring that one up. Maybe, 5 years in the future, you might be back and we'll talk about the white flag, because guess where the white flag was set, fictionally? Wabash, the city. White flag is about her, not her directly, but about things that happened as she went to high school here, things that happened as she was a young adult in this town. So the white flag is set fictionally in the city of Wabash. I told you all she was known as the Bird Woman, and she wrote herself into Freckles and Girl of the Limberlost as that character. And here's the 13 languages we know of that she was translated into. And look at the variety. Look over there on the far left side, Arabic. The first English language book ever translated to Arabic, A Girl of the Limberlost. So that just kind of shows you her impact around the world. And I do want to mention too, Japanese at the bottom there. Japanese they're into books that have to do with people in nature. So Freckles and Girl of the Limberlost were translated to Japanese 6 different times each. And so they were hugely popular over in Japan. We've even had a tourist come to the Limberlost State Historic Site from Japan. She had read the book Freckles in Japanese. So there you go. Indiana around the world. And here's another example. The name Limberlost now can be found around the world. That's 4 examples from a list we have of about 150 places and things named Limberlost now and in the past. 150 we're still adding to that list. So there you go. There's a Limberlost Dairy in Australia, Tasmania. There's Limberlost Strawberries in South Africa. There's a Limberlost Bus Station in England, Limberlost Lodge in Canada. And y'all, some of you got livestock on your farms. And I went back, and in the 19-teens and 1920s, there were registered cattle, Clydesdale horses, and hogs with the name Limberlost. And in fact, Gene Stratton Porter on her husband's farm, she had a polled Durham cow, that's the breed that Charles raised, called Limberlost Belle. So I have found a lot of examples of things named Limberlost. She was a famous nature photographer. She took pictures of birds in ways no one had ever done before. She won awards for that. And in an era without color photography, she took some of her own black and white photographs. She hand painted them herself with watercolors, so she would have color photographs in her book. And that is from Laws of the Limberlost. When that book went to the publisher, she painted 22 photographs in it. 22. So nothing seemed to stop her, except, unfortunately, a streetcar collision in Los Angeles. She was a conservationist. And, we had our conservation of the year here, these guys right up front, and I was at the Jay County meeting last night for Solomar Conservation District, and Ken Brunswick, the man who got all the Limberlost territories going, he won their award for Conservationists of the Year, like these gentlemen did here. So conservation, obviously, is one of the most important things anybody can do. Jean started off that way. One of the first publications she ever wrote about was against the fact that people killed birds all the time just to pluck a few feathers out and put them on hats. And Jean was among the inaugural group, the first group, inducted into the Indiana Conservation Hall of Fame when it was started in 2009. And we mentioned that she was a movie producer. The First time a movie was made of one of her books, it was Freckles. She hated it. So guess what she did? Started her own movie company so she could make her books into movies her way. I admire that a lot. It's like, you don't like what someone else is doing, do it yourself. She had the money to do that, of course, which is nice. But she was one of the first women to ever start a movie company. And these are a list of movies that we give away at our site, and just some of the movie posters that are associated with them. 23 movies have been made of 9 of her novels. Not many authors can say they've had 23 or more movies made of their works. I mean, some like Agatha Christie or Shakespeare have way more than that, but 23 movies made of your works is extraordinary. And there's the 1928 version her movie company made of Freckles. I guess who that young actress is there in the picture. Once again, her granddaughter, Jean Stratton Monroe, portraying the Swamp Angel. Just a couple of movie posters from some of the movies that have been made over the years, not by her company. And that's Jean Stratton in California, towards the end of her life. And this is how her life ended. She was killed December 6, 1924, when her chauffeur limousine was struck by a streetcar in Los Angeles. The driver was barely injured, and she was killed, died in the hospital a few hours later. So unfortunately, that's how it all ended for her. And you want to hear something kind of freaky? That car that you see smashed up in that Los Angeles newspaper photograph was specially made for her, and extra metal, extra strong. It was, fortified because she had a fear of dying in a car accident. And what hit her vehicle? A street car, not another car. So apparently, unfortunately, that was her destiny. You want to hear something else freaky? 20 years before she died in Los Angeles by being hit by a streetcar, her brother Irvin, in a horse and buggy, died near Los Angeles when his horse and buggy was hit by a streetcar. Gives me the goosebumps. All right, now we're just going to wind down. I want to talk briefly about what Limberlost is. Since it's a world famous name, let's just talk about what it all is, what happened to it. You'll see here that this is hard to believe, but there were 2 limbers that got lost. First one was down in Jay County along the stream, and a surveyor was surveying the area, asked people, what do you want to call this? What do you guys call it? The guy named Limber Jim Miller said, I got lost there once. Name it after me. The surveyor wrote down, this is on a piece of paper in Indianapolis, in their archives. He wrote down Limberlost Creek, 1820. Then about 20 years later, a 16-year-old boy named Limber Jim McDowell got separated from the hunting party he was with in the swamp that the Limberlost Creek ran through. The hunters returned home without him, and the cry went out, Limber's lost, Limber's lost. And it took 3 days to find him and return him home. He was hungry and scared, but he survived. And now the swamp also was called Limberlost. So one of them is a documented piece of paper. The other is a strong oral history that we believe is true. There were 2 Limber Jims that got lost. Kind of weird and very amazing. And Jean herself said the Limberlost is a word with which to conjure a spot wherein to revel. And there it is on the map as she describes it, which is right where it is. Northeastern Indiana, nearly 100 miles south of the Michigan line, 10 west of the Ohio. And that's right where we're at. I happen to live on the very edge of the Limberlost Swamp Nature Preserve. I tell people I have an 850-acre backyard, which is sort of true. Stretching the truth a little, but still true. That's a picture she took of it that she labeled at the edge of the Limberlost. And that's what it looked like, a map that Kim Brunswick put together. All that black there, that's wetlands. You see Geneva there, little red star. And that was about 13,000 acres, which is approximately 20 square miles of wetlands, swamp, and marsh, watershed, the whole area. Actually, the watershed itself is about 70,000 acres of the Loblolly Creek and Limberlost Creek. As she was writing about it, spreading its name around the world, it was being destroyed, drained for agriculture, trees cut down for the timber industry, oil, when oil was discovered, that did a lot of damage to it. But we can now say Limberlost lives again, because we have almost 1,800 acres of Limberlost conservation area nature preserves. And as I mentioned, Ken Brunswick, who got the award last night at Jay, he was the force behind this. It takes a lot of people to make this happen, but it can just take one person to be the spearhead, and that's what Ken did. He was the spearhead, and he got a lot of people behind him, and now we've got almost 1,800 acres. And that's the new preserves on the old map, so you see we are bringing back some of those original 13,000 acres. And by the way, these are lands that flood all the time, so farmers were happy to sell this off because they weren't very good farmland. You know, it's everybody, y'all know, you need good farmland, and when you got good farmland, you keep it that way. But when it floods all the time, we also need wetlands. Wetlands are critical to humans. So farmland's critical, wetlands are critical, and that's what was done here, is take the areas that were not good farmland, that were underwater a lot, turn them back into wetlands. All these are areas the public is allowed to go to for free, you know, they're nature preserves, and so we have trails on all these areas. And I do a Rent a Naturalist program. Okay, I have no shame. Here's a plug for me and my program. You can hire me for, and this is through the historic sites, not a personal thing I do, for 90 minutes for only $40, and that's a group. That's one person, that's 15 people. Bring a family. I've had 4 generations on my hikes before. And you choose where you want to go and what you want to see. And we do that, so it's your personalized tour of the Limberlost. And you get to go out and explore with that dashing, I won't say young, I'll say dashing, that dashing naturalist right there. That's me out by one of the largest trees, probably the largest tree in our area, sycamore tree. So we go out and we have a good time, we explore and learn a lot of things. And so I'm inviting you all to come to the historic site, come visit with me, go on a hike out there. And I'm not the only person that wants you to come, because someone way more important than me wants you to come also. There she is right there. Listen to me a minute, everyone. This is Gene Stratford speaking. Thank you for watching this program. I want you to visit the Limberlost. So thanks for having me back again. I know some of it was the same stuff, but I hope you enjoyed it anyway and learned a few new things. And I'll take questions if I have time. Penny says, if anybody has a question, I can answer about not only this, but anything else that you might want to ask about. Don't be shy. Okay, go ahead and be shy. All right, well, I appreciate you having me back. Thank you.